Good evening. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Sophie. On behalf of Books and Books, it's my pleasure to welcome you to a virtual evening with Nguyễn Phan and Gabrielle Zevin for a joint book discussion on their books, Dust Child and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Born and raised in Vietnam, Nguyễn Phan is the author of The Mountains Sing. She has published 12 books of poetry, fiction, and nonfiction and has received some of the top literary prizes in Vietnam. Her writing has been translated into 20 languages and has appeared in major publications, including the New York Times. Dust Child is an Indie Next Pick, named a Best Book of the Year so far by Reader's Digest, Cosmopolitan, and the Buzz magazines and Book Riot. Dust Child was also named a Best Book of March-Spring 2023 by the Los Angeles Times, Library Journal, GMA.com, Ms. Magazine, and the Chicago Review of Books and Book Club. Gabrielle Zevin is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of several critically acclaimed novels, including The Storied Life of A.J. Fikri, which is now a motion picture, and Young Jane Young. Her most recent novel is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Her novels have been translated into over 40 languages. She lives in Los Angeles. Just a quick reminder that throughout this broadcast, you can post questions below in the Ask a Question feature. That will be at the bottom of your screen. We'll do Q&A at the end. I highly encourage your participation. Please order your copies of Dust Child and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow from Books and Books. You can click the green button below our faces to purchase. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome our guests to the virtual stage.
Hi, Gabrielle.
How are you? Oh, my sound has gotten a little funky. Let's see.
Good.
Hopefully,
Good
it's
night.
good.
Thank you so much for doing your last event of the year for tomorrow with us. And thanks, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you for it's like 6 a.m. here in Bishkek, Kyrgyzstan, where I am, and it's late for you in Los Angeles, right? Oh, you are muted. You are muted, Gabrielle. I can't hear you. Okay.
Gabrielle, can you unmute your mic from your end? Because I cannot.
Can you hear me?
Sorry, everyone. We're having technological issues. Gabrielle, if you could exit out and then come back on, maybe that'll help. Sometimes this happens.
Are we back on?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. So we improvised and it's fine. Okay, good. Phew.
Oh, I want to give you a big hug because we met in New Zealand, in Auckland, out of all the places, right?
Yes, it was very strange because I had just been in Australia because you can do these 4 book festivals of Australia, and then the last is you fly to New Zealand and you do the Auckland Writers Festival. And so I didn't find I was that jet lagged going from Los Angeles to Melbourne, but I found I was really jet lagged going from Sydney to Auckland, which doesn't make any sense. That relatively small, 3 hours, really hit me hard. So we were there in the very early morning to see, I think it's pronounced the Powery. The Powery. Yes, is that what it was? It's kind of the ceremonial introduction that they do at the beginning of the festival, to greet us. And so I was very jet lagged, and then I was so excited to meet you and to run into you, and I liked you immediately, and so that's why we're having this conversation now.
I came up to you and I said, your book Tomorrow and Tomorrow helped me with my relationship with my son. Because he used to play video games during the pandemic, and because I don't play video games, so I used to think it's a waste of time. And I think reading that book really helped me to look at video games in a different way. It's a creative it's a creative thing. You interact with people, and I think by talking with him, I really understood he needed to play to interact with his friends, because during the pandemic people couldn't go out, couldn't do things together, so they play video games. So he was connecting with people from all over the world, with his old friends, with video games. So I think your book really, foster empathy, and you always present, different perspectives of people regardless of who they are. So I really admire you for that.
Well, thank you so much. And, I think it's interesting, and it's a theme that I definitely see in your books as well. Humans, ever since we were human, have found ways to tell stories, whether we're painting on the cave or we're telling novels or we're making video games. In a sense, we are trying to figure out ways to communicate with each other and make sense of our brief time on planet Earth through narrative, And so I think, in a sense, when people are resistant to video games, I think they forget that people used to be quite resistant to novels, like novels, a couple centuries ago were seen as something that would be, that would ruin people's brains and disconnect them from reality. And so, in a sense, I think it's a natural progression to look at all of these forms without prejudice. I think we're just, again, trying to, and especially, people like your son during the pandemic, I think they were definitely trying to find ways to connect to people when we could not actually connect physically with people, in a sense. So that was something that interested me. So we have to be very disciplined because we only have 30 minutes or something like that. And I want to spend a good amount of that time talking about Dust Child and about you. So I am actually, I should tell people a little bit about what Dust Child is about, and we'll get to that. But a thing that really intrigues me about you is that you made the decision at a certain point in your career to write in English. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little bit, because I think it's so fascinating.
So I think, in your book, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, you talk about importance of starting over again. And I think that's the fun of video games. You can have a new, if you have a new day, you have a chance to start again.
Yes.
And I felt I restarted my life in many different ways. I grew up in Vietnam, and I had to do different jobs to help my family survive. And I always dreamt of being a writer, and I was told no, because writers would not be able to earn a living. And writers in Vietnam also face a lot of problems, including censorship.
Yes.
So my parents did not want me to become a writer. So I went on to do different things. And years later, because of my love for literature, I started to translate Vietnamese poetry for free. So I worked for many, many years translating Vietnamese poetry. Whenever I saw or I read a beautiful poem, it was just my natural desire to translate it. I translated a lot of poems about the Vietnam War from veterans of both sides to kind of foster empathy and, humanize people and to call for peace. And I wanted to translate a novel because I was thinking, people don't read a lot of poetry these days. So, if I were to translate a novel, I would have more readers. So I was looking for that novel until one day I told myself, I need to write this novel myself to save the years of translating. And this is, it began my crazy journey of writing in English because, my schools did not have English teachers. So I kind of, I learned English very late in my life. And when I got a scholarship to study in Australia, when I was at university, it was for business. So I studied business. So when I started writing in English, my vocabulary for literature was quite low. I had to catch up. I had to catch up with reading, with learning a lot, and I think it has been a fun journey, difficult, but fun.
Well, you write beautifully in English. And I had read an interview with you where you talked about how you doubted your own ability to express complicated thoughts and emotions in English. And I just wondered, because my own mom was born in Korea, came to America as a young person. And so, and I talk a little bit about it in Tomorrow, and the character of, both in Sam's grandparents and some of the others. But I was curious what it feels like to write in a second or adopted language, and if you'd ever really reached a point where you felt you had an idea that was just untranslatable into English.
Oh, I mean, I have that doubt all the time. At the moment, I'm drafting my third novel, and I'm thinking I can never do this. Um, but I think I'm compelled because of the topics that I write about. Sometimes my characters would call to me in my sleep, and they say, "Get up and write." Our stories cannot sleep until you tell them. So I'm compelled by the themes and the stories that I needed to write, and I think I also needed to write in English because so few writers from Vietnam have been able to present our stories. Like if you look at the canon of literature in English about Vietnam, we are normally, Vietnamese people from inside Vietnam don't have space to tell our stories, because we have been colonized and also in literature. So when I started writing in English, I told my publisher with the Mountain Sing and Dust Child as well to use my name in the full diacritics, to have these tonal marks in the authentic Vietnamese way. Because I feel it's important to decolonize our literature and present, the language it is rather than to make it, easy to the eyes and ears of the Western readers. So I, in terms of difficulties, I encounter a lot of difficulties in because I want to transfer, the beauty of the Vietnamese language, the poetic traditions of Vietnamese, literature into English as well. So that's why I have a lot of proverbs and idioms and poetry in my book. And I think my novels are my epic poems. I write novels because I want to cheat the readers into reading my poetry.
I mean, I was really curious because I know that you are a translator and that you were a translator before you were a novelist. And I wondered, do you ever, when you're writing in English, do you feel like you're translating or do you feel like you're writing in English?
Oh, when I write my novels now, I think in English.
Yeah.
But I think in English, so I do write in English and convey that. But at the same time, sometimes, I think writing in English helped me in a way that because I write about, very difficult histories of Vietnam,
Yes.
stories that have been censored or brushed aside or buried. So sometimes, having that distance was really helpful. For example, I wrote about the Great Hunger, where 2 million Vietnamese, including three of my family members, died, and it was so painful to describe, that period of history where so many people died. And I think writing in English distanced myself a little bit from that pain and that trauma. Um, but at the same time, sometimes I had to unlock my emotions by writing in my mother tongue. So sometimes when I felt the emotions were not right for certain scenes, I would start writing the scenes in Vietnamese first. And when I felt it was right, then I switched to writing in English. But I enjoy like transferring, the Vietnamese literary traditions, um, Vietnamese culture into my work in English because I feel like this is something that the readers would want to know about Vietnam. I want to serve the readers an authentic meal of Vietnamese food with ginger, chili, lemongrass instead and fish sauce instead of making it a westernized version of Vietnam.
Yeah, and I think you feel that when you read the book. We should say a little bit about what Dust Child is about for those who haven't read it yet. The way I would describe it is it's about a son who's looking for his father and a father who's looking for his child and maybe for forgiveness. And it takes place in the semi-recent past, 2016, and during the Vietnam War, and for several times in between. And it has quite an interesting structure. But I feel like then if I describe it that way, it's really about how all these characters also come together. In a sense, the thing it reminded me the most of is it has sort of a Dickensian structure to it. Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I love to play with structures when I write my novel because, like, this is the type, I like to write the novels that I want to read. So for me, suspense and surprises are very important. And I think I see that in your novel as well. I think, Tomorrow and That's Jai have some common themes, because
yeah,
yeah,
there's
I
a lot of common themes. It's funny.
yeah.
Like on the
So
surface, they don't seem like they maybe would have that much in common, but they actually do. I think one of the big themes of your novel is really, it's a novel about race. And I would say that's one of the smaller themes of my novel, but it's definitely present. And in a way, they're both explorations about what it is to be biracial people and in between cultures. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the Fong character, what it's like to be perhaps a dark-skinned Vietnamese / American person, and who are the Bui Doi.
yeah. So my novels are about American children who were born and abandoned during the Vietnam War, and they were either half white or half black. So I chose a black character because I wanted to write about racism, which is so common within our Vietnamese society, and so little has been written about that. And I think American people are those who are the victims of the Vietnam War. And I wanted to write beyond being victims here because Phong in my novel, even though he's illiterate and he was abandoned at birth, but he's a carpenter, he's a musician of Vietnamese traditional music. And I think, he's very creative. And, I think reading Tomorrow, oh, now I want to talk about your book because I am sure the readers out there want to hear about your book as well. So, I love your characters because Sam, for example, your characters are so complex. I mean, that's I want to write from that way too, that, he's, like, for example, Samson in your book, even though he's disabled, he lost his mom and he's been through a lot, but he can be selfish sometimes, but he's very caring, he's very loving for the people around him. So I want to ask you, so Tomorrow is your 10th novel. How long did it take you to write? Did you map out the storyline before you started writing it? And what are some of the techniques you learned from writing the other 9 novels that helped you come up with such a unique, compelling, and human story?
I read somewhere that you said it has taken you 7 years to write each of your novels. 7 years seems like a good number, but and I wanted to ask you about why 7 years exactly. It seems like almost a magical number. But for me, Tomorrow took about 5 years to write, which was fairly long for me. I think I've learned a lot on all of the other novels I've written. I feel like, and it's funny because when you have a novel that's a big success, people will say, "Oh, congratulations on your debut," and you're like, "Well, actually, I've written a bunch of other novels," And so, it's actually a very funny sort of thing with that. I feel like Tomorrow is the kind of book that could only have been written by somebody who's written a lot of other novels, even in terms of some of the themes of the story, which are so much about an artistic career across time, how we cope with failure, how we cope with success, how we are, try to just live in the world as a public person in some way. And so it's not a novel that I would have been able to even write because they weren't things I really understood, I think, when I started out as a novelist, I think, the biggest thing that's changed for me as a writer from when I was starting out is that I'm much more patient with myself than I was. I think the subject of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is largely the ambition one feels in their 20s. There's a German word for it, Torschlusspanik, which means gate shut panic, the feeling that time is running out and you only have and you'll miss an opportunity if you don't manage to do something right away. And I felt kind of like Torschlusspanik, my whole life. But when I hit 40, I realized that it was actually quite liberating for me, because I think over the years, there are so many categories of awards and prizes and distinctions for like people under 30 and then people under 35. And so when I actually hit 40 years old, I realized that I wasn't going to get anything because of my age or because of my youth, that the only thing left for me to be at this point in my life was good. And that made me feel really patient and really determined to not leave any stone unturned when I was looking at tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. And so 5 years, the first couple of years spent researching. A thing I've learned about myself over the years is that at a certain point writing any novel, I will want to quit it, and write something else. And so I definitely had that period. And then, when the pandemic happened, I hadn't actually written tons of the novel yet. I had researched a lot, but I hadn't written that much of it. But when the pandemic happened, I realized that I just wanted to figure out this story. Like if there weren't any readers and there wasn't any publishing and all of that, just for myself, I wanted to figure out how to get these two characters. I had these like Sam and Sadie on a train platform, and I just wanted to figure out how to get these people off the train platform. And so it was this sort of liberation that came from feeling very alone. And obviously the pandemic was a very terrible time in many, many ways, but it was in a certain way a good time to be a writer because it allowed, a quiet and a sense of, and an ability to travel places without actually traveling. And so it's something, that again, I think about quite a lot. And so I don't know that I'd ever been able to find that sort of quiet or patience before. I think I had always been such an impatient person that was the thing I've had to learn the most. What would you say across your first and second novel that you've learned? What is different for you?
Oh, I learned a lot. I love what you said about being patient with ourselves because, as a novelist, who has published work before, you kind of wanna, you see other writers out there publishing books, and I myself feel, oh, I have to be quicker because like it took me so many years to craft each novel, and you are so right. I can see the patience in tomorrow because like for example, Dove, who's like, the he's like a teacher of Sadie, and he's a horrible person because vented her sexually, and also, but then you are patient with him because like he comes back and he's there for her during her most difficult times, and I think the empathy to empathize even with an evil character, I feel is fascinating. And I appreciate that patience. And I think I learned to be more patient with myself. And I think, being more easy on myself because like I'm always very critical of myself. And I always tell myself, this is not good enough. I can't do this project. And I feel like I felt quitting so many times during the many years I was writing my book. And I think patience is so important.
Yeah, I feel like and I don't want to get ahead of this because we haven't really kind of set up the characters of Zhang and Gwyn, who are these two bar girls, and I wanted to talk about them. But also, I feel like the character, you do a little bit of the same thing I do with Dove, with the character of Teen, the guide. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but he's an interesting character, I think, because he shifts a great deal. It's not like he doesn't have any of the proclivities of Dove, but in a sense, I like the character in a story who is the shapeshifter, who you can't really hold on to, you can't really know. And it's something that I think novels do really well, as opposed to shorter forms. I think that a novel can show a character across time and how time exerts pressure and change on a person. And so to me, that's what's really interesting. And both of our novels have have a similar span of time. Mine is about 30 years. Yours will be about 50. Is that right? About 50 years in Dust Child?
Yes.
You cover a lot of ground in about 300 pages,
My editor always tell me because I'm always ambitious in the span of time. So my editors always told me, "Oh, you can't cover everything in a single book." But I think as a writer, you want to achieve as many things as you can. And I feel you achieve so many things with Tomorrow. Like you have woven so many important messages into this book. Mixed race identity, racism, sexual harassment, disability, appropriation, recognition of artistic contribution, our ability to forgive, and our difficulty in expressing love, gun violence as well. So, did you have all of these messages in mind before you start a book, before you started this book, or did you add them during the editing process? And how important is it for you in terms of delivering socially impact, a socially impacted novel?
It's funny. I don't think when I started out as a novelist, I very much believed in the novel as a vehicle for social change. I thought I could change hearts and minds with novels. And over the years, I realized that that was asking a lot of a novel. And I think by the time I wrote Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, I had, and this speaks to your other question, I had more of a sense of what the novel could do. The fact that that really what novels do very well is, and this is a quote that Roger Ebert once said about movies, he called them empathy machines. But I think really novels are the same way. They are empathy machines. They can show you a person who is either like you or unlike you and say a little bit, this is what it is like to be someone else. So in terms of the many social issues that appear to be addressed in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, in a way, it isn't to me about addressing those issues. It's about how these characters move through the world. And so I wanted to write the world and its changes. You asked me about Dove before. The thing that interested me about a person like Dove, and this speaks to your question, is the fact that, in 1995, when we meet him, he is the kind of big personality on a college campus who was fine, as long as he kind of just didn't go too far, he would be fine. But, anytime post 2017, this is a guy who lives in a post Me Too universe. And so he would not be as fine. And so what was interesting to me was how our social mores change how we see people over the years. And so that was the thing I wanted to show, I guess, the way our world has changed so much. And it's something, you and I are about the same age. And it was something I didn't see until I kind of, hit my late 30s and 40s, that there are ways in which we take the world as static, as unchanging. But if you look at it, the world is always changing. And so I love what time can do and the way time can show how differently we feel about so many things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love the way that you show the transformation of your characters. And I think I read in one of the creative writing handbooks that, I think we want to create, write characters who are dynamic, who are capable of changing. And you did change my mind with Tomorrow. And I mean, you said you didn't aim it to be, to achieve the purpose of changing people's minds, but it did change mine and help my relationship with my son. So
I guess
thank you.
Stop seeing novels as pedagogical in a sense. We have plenty of things that will teach. I think that the novel teaches, but maybe inadvertently. I think before, when I started out, I didn't think I was doing this, but I sometimes had more of a horse, I guess that's a cliche, more of a stake in what the message would be. And for me, I now have very little stake in that. I think what I want is, and sometimes I would think about message and it would get in the way of character. You would make the characters be vehicles for certain things you were trying to say. And I'm no longer interested in that, I guess is what I'm saying. I would rather, show a character who is flawed or is complicated and not necessarily get people to a place where they're feeling the same things I feel. A great thing about the world and about novels is that we don't all feel the same way about every single thing.
Exactly, and that makes it interesting and surprising, right? Also, yeah. I wanted to ask about the movie of Tomorrow because the movie rights have been acquired by Temple Hill and Paramount Studios, and yes. You are working on a screenplay.
Well, technically everybody's on strike right now. I'm in the Writers Guild of America, and so nothing is happening at all at this moment. I think the challenge of the movie version is that the book does take place over 30 years, and some of the the story, it feels like a lot of story sometimes to squish into the 2 hours of a movie, like I think, for me, I would love to see it on the big screen because it is a book that is about biracial people and Asian people and other kinds of people that we haven't really seen on the big screen before. And so for me, that would be very meaningful to see, I think, people like myself. But I also feel like the story in some ways sometimes wants to have a longer form, like it wants to be like a 4-hour movie or something like that. So, but yes, but nothing is really happening right now because of the strike. And so it's a little bit of a pause.
But you have written the screenplays for 80 Figure and Conversations for Other Women. So how is writing a screenplay different than writing in a novel? And can all novelists learn to be a good screenplay writers?
I think so. I mean, in a way, it's about learning the kind of structures and of screenplay. I think screenplays do certain things, and in a way, it's why I sometimes think Tomorrow isn't particularly suited to screen structure because I have written a lot of screenplays. I think screenplays tend to be a lot of people that with external actions and clear external motivations, and novels can be so internal. And so I think, in a way. But I do think, to answer your question, yes, it's like learning anything. It's just learning to speak the language of screenplay, and then I think you can do that. But I like it. I do actually like working in that form because it's very minimalist in a way, and it is very external, and it's always 90 to 120 pages, and the scenes always move in a certain way, and the story is told in a certain way. And so it's just an entirely different way of thinking about story than I think you do when you're writing a novel well. I feel like we didn't have enough time to talk about Dust Child. I have like 50 questions.
A lot of questions.
I know, but rounds, except none of them are really appropriate for a speed round because they're all like super complicated. Like I'm like, what are the biggest misrepresentations about Vietnam? Like you can do that in about 2 minutes, right? Like they're ridiculous questions considering how little time we have. So I'm sorry for that, but it is a wonderful book. And I just think you're a wonderful storyteller. And I think something that's really cool about the book is, there were so many things I wanted to talk about with you with this, but just the ways in which the stories we tell about ourselves become our lives. Like a part I really liked, and I want to talk about it without really spoiling it, is that, toward the end of the book, one of the characters will make up a story. And it made me think a lot of like the Joan Didion quote, how we tell ourselves stories in order to live. And it's just a very beautiful moment in the book. And it's really interesting. And I also loved the fact that the character of Fong, like that he is illiterate, and then, but really he is in a story, it's a novel surrounded by people telling stories all of the time. And anyway, it's a really cool book.
I think we lost Kwe Mai. Can you see her?
I can't see her. It says I'm waiting for her to reconnect.
Okay. Let's wait a few minutes.
I mean, I suppose we could go out to the Q&A.
Yeah, but we kind of need Kwe Mai.
We do need her here. I know, but I think like like
back. Yes,
we're back.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. We're good.
So shall we move on to the Q&A, or do you guys want to go?
We're just about there, I think. So since we had a natural pause, is that okay with you?
Yeah. Let's have audience questions if we have some. Sorry about that. My internet was disconnected.
No worries. I wish we had all the time in the world to go over this book, but the Q&A. Let's start. We have a question asking, what do you think drives you both to continue writing through an age of lots of divide in attention span, life-changing due to AI, etc.? Do you face any new challenges as the publishing industry is changing? How?
That's a multi-part question, really.
It is.
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
Okay. Thank you for the question. Fascinating. I think for me, writing is really hard. And I think I chose to write because I want to create something. I think, with fiction, for example, I want to
create worlds which I want to explore and learn and get to know my characters and to know myself. So I learned a lot through the writing process. And I think there are stories which have not been told, which compel me to write about them. And I think in terms of challenging for me, personally, I live, in Kyrgyzstan, away from everywhere. So it's difficult for me to get to bookshops. So I want to thank Sophie and Books for hosting this event, and this means a lot. And I want to thank readers for tuning in, Gabrielle for being here for me. So thank you all so much. And I think I write to connect with people. I want to be able to travel to different places with my books. And I think the publishing industry out there is changing a lot. But I think as a writer, we just need to learn and catch up with the trends. And I think I'm just really am really grateful that I can learn by reading, by talking with other writers. So yeah, it's a time of learning.
And I don't really worry about people being distracted. I think there have always been a lot of things that distracted people. We used to have to spend a lot of time, say, doing a load of laundry used to take all day, and now maybe you do other things. And in a sense, I think the novel can provide attentions, can provide like a certain experience that other things cannot provide. And people seem to still want that, to kind of invest deeply into worlds and lives that are not their own, and I see lots of evidence that people actually have extremely great attention spans these days. Like, why will somebody binge a television show that takes 13, 14 hours, or why will somebody play a video game like The Witcher, which takes 60 hours to play through, or the new Zelda? I think there are many ways in which people have great attention if you can manage to capture it in some way,
Mm.
Regarding tomorrow, can you talk about the pioneer section of the book and how you thought of it?
I can. So the pioneer section of the book is pretty deep into the novel, so I'll try to talk about it without spoilers, I guess. Although I'm not a person who's precious about spoilers. I kind of think like a good spoiler can compel me to read something. Do you feel like that? Do you care about spoilers?
I think we don't have to. I mean, your book is so good, and I think we don't have to spoil it for those who don't read it. So don't read the ending.
I bet more philosophically and generally, do you care about them? Because I find I don't. It's like the worst thing you can do in the world is like spoil something for somebody else. But I find personally, like I don't worry about it as much as other people seem to. But so anyway, Pioneers comes pretty deep in the story, and it's a game that one character makes for another. So for me, what I wanted Pioneers is sort of I guess people describe it as it takes place in a video game. But for me, what I wanted it to feel like was an Old West story, or sort of like I guess you would say a sort of art film, like Portrait of a Lady on Fire, what they call like muddy hemline movies, where you see kind of two characters and they're having this like amazing, usually lesbian romance of some kind. And that's what I wanted Pioneers to feel like, something set in the Old West. And so the trick of it was that it was a mix of the very modern, which is video game, and something that should have felt like it was from the past as well. I struggled over writing it. I knew, because I had written many novels, that anytime you try to make something formally different, you will lose some percentage of people when you do it. And so I knew that for this section and the section called the NPC to work, that they needed to really work or they wouldn't work at all. And in any case, I guess that was sort of the process of writing it. Was just going over it and over it and over it. I would say that's my special skill as a novelist, that I can go over something thousands of times. I like to read over all the work I have done, so I'm at the same place that a reader is when I am getting to that point as a writer. So I will read everything I've written every day, which gets to be quite onerous when a book is approaching 500 pages, and then sometimes I'll only read the prior 300 or something like that. But I do like to get into that place. And so with Pioneers, again, I just went over it and over it and over it and I knew I would still lose some people, and I didn't care. So
Could you tell us more about your writing routines, such as your favorite place to write, favorite time of day, etc.?
What great questions. I think I used to have, a very strict routine, like getting up really early in the morning, to catch the earliest words of the day. And, right before I had to make breakfast for my kids and send them to school. But nowadays, as a published writer, your schedules are interrupted. Like I have been on tour for the last 4 months.
wow.
So I think so. Then, as you progress, you need to learn to work everywhere, ride on an airplane, in a cafe, in a crowded place. So now I just write whenever I have the time. How about you, Gabrielle?
I've had every kind of process for writing a book, but what I have found over the years is that the person who promotes the book and the person who writes the book shouldn't have too much to do with each other. so I think that I gave myself the gift of not really writing while I was promoting. Like I did sort of some researching and things like that, but I haven't really. I found that I don't want to write in a distracted way, and for me, it actually ended up making the promoting of the book harder when I was constantly sort of trying to be two people, and because really I do feel like, again, the person who writes the book is so different from this person who is outward facing and is like, let me tell you a story about everything that I've done. And so that has been a thing for me over the years. I find that I do actually like to write very early in the morning. I used to say before I've hurt anyone's feelings or before anyone's hurt my feelings, it's like the best time to start. And during the pandemic, I got into like disciplined napping, which is going to seem like discipline and napping can't go together. But I found that I like to get up early. I like to work, and then I like to, whatever, work out, have lunch, and then I like to take a nap and then work again. Because in a sense, taking a nap sort of like hit like reset, and I was able to have a second work day where I felt kind of clear again. But I've had all kinds of processes. I think there are ways in which, obviously a variation on this question is often asked if you do an event. And I think that there's a tendency for writers to sort of, I don't know, aestheticize the process of writing a book, or to kind of, just turn it into narrative a bit. Like I remember the first event I ever did, I thought it was with an older woman writer. And well, she was probably my age now, but I thought she was like an older woman writer. And, she described how she had like, when she would write, she had a chaise longue and she'd light a scented candle and she'd play like classical music. And at that time, it sounded very like, seductive to me, as if she was having a lover over, but for me, I realized, even at that time, I was living in a 1-bedroom, very small apartment, and I did everything on my couch. I entertained people on my couch. I worked on my couch. I did everything on my couch. And so I think I understand like why people ask the question, because they sort of want to know like how do I do that thing? And if I follow these steps, can I do the same thing? But I will say I've written novels all sorts of ways. And I think the process will constantly be evolving. Isn't part of the challenge of being a novelist, finding what the process is for the particular novel you're working on, and what that novel actually needs and wants,
Yep.
We are running out of time, so I just kind of wanted to ask my own question before we end this conversation. I was wondering, what do you want readers to take away from Dust Child? What is the biggest thing you want readers to take away from that?
Sorry, this question is a bit hard for me. I think, as a writer, I think Ocean Vuong, one of my most favorite writers, said that when you finish a book, it's like you finish building a boat and you let it sail on a river, and readers, will get onto the boat and they will experience it, and they will make it into their own version of the boat, of the world you have built. And I hope that, each person will make their own world out of Dust Child and experience the lives of my characters and travel to Vietnam and get to know Vietnam and meet the people and understand, some of the issues we are facing until today. And I want to highlight that my book is really about real life issues, about, people who are still searching for each other out there. There are tens of thousands of people, and since I have since the publication of this book, quite a few adoptees have been reaching out to me and discussing with me whether they should find their parents or not, because it's a big decision. And in the book I talk about the consequences of finding family members, because you may not find a happy ending. It can be happy, it can be but it can be also very heartbreaking. So I want to prepare people for that if they do want to search for family members.
Well, Gabrielle, Mai, thank you both for such a powerful conversation. I wish we had all the time in the world to talk about both these books, because they're just that good. But on behalf of Books and Books, I really want to thank you guys for coming on. And to the audience, thank you so much for watching. There's a green button below our faces where you can purchase a copy. So yeah, everyone have an incredible evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this great time. And I want to say that Gabrielle has written all the fantastic novels. AJ Figry is one of my favorite novels too. And Jane Young is also very fantastic. So if you have read Tomorrow and Tomorrow, check out her other books as well.
And thank you so much.
And thanks for supporting Books and Books.
Yes, thanks for having us, Books and Books. This was great. It's great that we can connect across like so many different time zones and countries, and it's something that we kind of take for granted because it was forced upon us during the pandemic. But it's also kind of like miraculous and magical that we can do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.